In the sunlit artist colony of New Venice, where Earth's last master craftspeople maintained their ancient traditions, Thomas Ward's ceramic studio stood apart from the sleek automated workshops that dominated 23rd-century art production. The scent of earth and clay and the quiet whir of his manual pottery wheel created an atmosphere that felt almost archaic in an age of molecular fabrication. Thomas wiped the clay from his calloused hands as he studied his latest work, a series of vessels whose surfaces rippled with subtle textures inspired by quantum wave patterns. At 45, he had earned his reputation as one of the few remaining artists who worked exclusively by hand, refusing to incorporate neural assists or haptic augmentations into his process. The studio's old-fashioned bell chimed, its sound cutting through the afternoon quiet. Thomas looked up to find a tall figure silhouetted in the doorway, their form obscured by the bright sunlight streaming in behind them. As they stepped inside, Thomas felt his breath catch. The visitor was unmistakably Laminian, one of the mysterious artistic savants from the Centauri system. Her skin held an opalescent quality that seemed to shift between deep violet and midnight blue, and her movements carried an otherworldly grace that made even the simple act of walking appear choreographed. "I am Naira Vel," she said, her voice carrying harmonic undertones that seemed to resonate with the clay dust in the air. "Your work speaks to frequencies few humans can perceive." Thomas straightened, trying to maintain his professional composure despite his surprise. The Laminians were legendary in artistic circles for their ability to perceive and manipulate quantum resonance patterns, but they rarely sought out human artists. "Welcome to my studio. I'm honored, though I admit I'm curious what brings a Laminian master to my humble workshop." Naira moved closer, her gaze fixed on his latest pieces. The air around her seemed to shimmer with subtle distortions. "These vessels, you've captured quantum harmonies in their texture, yet you work without technological assistance. How?" "I simply follow what the clay tells me," Thomas replied, watching as she circled his work. "After 30 years of working with earth and water, you develop a sense for the patterns that want to emerge." "Fascinating." Naira turned to face him fully. "I have a proposition, Master Ward. My people believe we're approaching a crucial moment in the artistic evolution of our species. We seek to commission works that bridge the gap between human intuition and Laminian perception." Thomas felt a familiar thrill of creative challenge, even as caution made him hesitate. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A collaboration. One that would combine your mastery of physical craft with our understanding of quantum resonance. We believe the result could revolutionize interstellar art." She produced a small crystal that projected a holographic contract into the air between them. "The terms are generous, and you would retain full creative freedom." Thomas studied the floating text, noting the unprecedented resources being offered. "Why me? There are artists with far more advanced technical capabilities." "That is precisely why we chose you," Naira replied. "Your refusal to rely on technological assistance has made you uniquely attuned to the natural harmonies we perceive. You feel what others must measure." As Thomas considered her words, he noticed something extraordinary. The clay on his latest pieces seemed to be responding to Naira's presence, their surfaces showing minute shifts in pattern that shouldn't have been possible in fired ceramics. "The clay recognizes kindred frequencies," Naira explained, noting his observation. "This is merely a glimpse of what we might achieve together." Thomas reached out to touch one of the vessels, feeling an unfamiliar resonance beneath his fingers. In 3 decades of working with clay, he'd never experienced anything like it. The possibilities were both thrilling and terrifying. "I should warn you," he said carefully, "that working without technological assistance means the process will be slower, less predictable. There will be failures along the way." Naira's skin rippled with patterns that seemed to mirror the textures of his pottery. "In art, there are no failures, only discoveries waiting to be understood. Will you join us in this exploration?" Thomas looked around his studio, at the wheels and kilns that had served him faithfully for decades, at the shelves of work that documented his artistic journey. Everything he'd created until now felt suddenly like preparation for this moment. He turned back to Naira, seeing in her iridescent eyes the promise of artistic frontiers he'd never imagined possible. "Yes," he said simply. "Let's discover what clay and quantum harmonies can teach us." The contract sparkled as his digital signature joined hers, and Thomas could have sworn he felt the clay around his studio humming in response, as if every piece he'd ever created was awakening to new possibilities. Their collaboration would either bridge worlds or break new ground entirely, only time would tell which. The first weeks of Thomas and Naira's collaboration transformed the studio into an intersection of two artistic worlds. Thomas had cleared a dedicated space where quantum resonance could flow freely, following Naira's guidance about electromagnetic interference. The air itself seemed different there, charged with possibilities that defied conventional physics. Thomas watched in fascination as Naira moved her hands over a fresh block of clay, her skin emanating subtle waves of energy that made the material respond in ways he'd never seen before. The surface rippled like liquid mercury, though it maintained its solid form. "The clay remembers," Naira explained, her harmonics creating patterns in the dust motes floating through the sunbeams. "Each piece carries echoes of the Earth's quantum signature. Your years of working by hand have left their own resonance, layer upon layer of human creative energy." Thomas approached, drawn by the mesmerizing display. "Can you teach me to see what you see?" "Perhaps not see," Naira replied, "but feel, yes." She gestured him closer. "Place your hands here, just above the surface. Close your eyes and listen with more than your ears." Thomas followed her instructions, expecting to feel foolish. Instead, a subtle tingling sensation began in his fingertips, like static electricity but more rhythmic. The sensation grew stronger as Naira placed her hands near his, their energies creating interference patterns he could somehow perceive. "That's impossible," he whispered, eyes still closed. "I'm feeling quantum effects at a macro scale." "Your dedication to traditional craft has made you sensitive to frequencies most humans filter out," Naira said. "You've been working with quantum harmonies all along, you simply lacked the framework to recognize them." Their first attempt at true collaboration was a disaster. The clay exploded in the kiln, the competing resonances creating unstable patterns that literally tore the material apart. The second attempt liquefied, losing all structural integrity. But with each failure, they learned. "The key," Naira explained one evening as they examined the remnants of their latest attempt, "is not to force human and Lemnian techniques to combine, but to find the natural harmonies between them." Thomas ran his fingers over the partially successful piece, feeling the way certain sections held both earthen stability and quantum resonance. "It's like learning a new language," he mused. "One that speaks in textures and frequencies instead of words." They developed a rhythm, working in tandem as they explored the boundaries between their artistic traditions. Thomas would throw a form on his wheel, his decades of experience guiding his hands, while Naira would attune the clay's quantum signature, creating pieces that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Thomas had been working late, exploring techniques they discovered by accident. His hands moved through familiar motions, but now he could feel the subtle quantum harmonies Naira had taught him to recognize. As he centered a new piece of clay, he found himself humming, not just vocally, but somehow with his entire being, matching frequencies he'd never known he could produce. The clay responded immediately. The surface began to shimmer with patterns that reminded him of Naira's skin, but they were emerging from his own interaction with the material. When Naira arrived the next morning, she stopped in the doorway, her skin pulsing with astonishment. "You've done it," she breathed, moving closer to examine the piece. "You've achieved quantum resonance without Lemnian assistance. This changes everything." Thomas studied his creation in the morning light. The vessel seemed to shift and flow, its surface alive with patterns that bridged the gap between human craft and alien artistry. "I think I finally understand what you meant about natural harmonies. It's not about combining two separate techniques, it's about finding the place where they were always one. Naira's skin rippled with patterns that matched the vessel's surface. My people believed this might be possible, but many thought it would take generations. You've accomplished it in weeks. We've accomplished it, Thomas corrected. I wouldn't have known where to begin without your guidance. He paused, considering the implications. What happens now? Now, Naira said, her harmonics filling the studio with resonant energy, we push beyond what either of our species thought possible. Are you prepared for that? Thomas looked at his hands, still coated in clay but now somehow more attuned to the quantum world around him. He could feel the potential humming in every piece of clay in the studio, waiting to be shaped by this new understanding. I've spent my life defending traditional craftsmanship, he said slowly. But maybe true tradition isn't about preserving the past, it's about building bridges to the future. As if in response, the successful piece on his will began to pulse with new patterns, its quantum harmonies interacting with their combined creative energies. They stood together, human and Leminian, watching as art evolved before their eyes into something that had never existed before, and would soon change both their worlds forever. News of Thomas and Naira's breakthrough spread through the artistic community like wildfire. Their studio became a focal point of controversy, drawing both passionate supporters and fierce critics. Traditional ceramicists accused Thomas of abandoning his principles, while tech-integrated artists dismissed their work as primitive despite its revolutionary nature. One morning, Thomas arrived to find Master Raphael Chen, head of the Terra Classical Arts Council, waiting outside his studio. The elderly man's stern expression suggested this wasn't a social call. You've caused quite a stir, Thomas, Raphael said, his eyes fixed on the quantum-resonant pieces displayed in the studio's window. The council is concerned about the implications of your recent work. Thomas unlocked the studio door, inviting his former mentor inside. Concerned about what, exactly? That art might evolve? That we might lose something precious in the rush to embrace alien influences, Raphael countered, running his fingers over a traditional piece from Thomas's earlier work. You were our strongest advocate for pure human craftsmanship. Now look at this. He gestured to their latest pieces, which shimmed with quantum harmonies. Can you even explain how these are made? Before Thomas could respond, Naira emerged from the studio's back room, her skin pulsing with subtle patterns that reflected her emotional state. The inability to fully explain art is what makes it art, Master Chen. Would you demand that a sunset justify its colors? Raphael stiffened, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. This isn't about justification. It's about preservation. Our traditional techniques are not under threat, Thomas interrupted. If anything, this collaboration has deepened my understanding of classical craftsmanship. The quantum harmonies were always there, we just couldn't perceive them before. As if to demonstrate, Thomas sat at his wheel and began working a fresh piece of clay. His movements were the same ones he'd used for decades, but now they flowed with new purpose. The clay responded to both his physical touch and the quantum frequencies he'd learned to channel, creating patterns that seemed to dance between dimensions. Watch closely, Naira suggested to Raphael. Every traditional technique Thomas uses creates specific resonance patterns. We haven't replaced human craftsmanship, we've revealed its hidden depths. Raphael leaned in despite himself, his skepticism warring with obvious fascination. The patterns, they're not random, are they? They're expressions of universal harmonies, Thomas explained, his hands never stopping their work. The same mathematics that govern the formation of galaxies and the growth of crystals. Human artists have always intuited these patterns, now we can work with them consciously. The demonstration was interrupted by the arrival of another visitor, Director Vela Thorne of the Interstellar Arts Federation. Her chrome-enhanced features betrayed no emotion as she surveyed the studio. Fascinating, she said, her augmented eyes scanning the pieces. But hardly profitable in its current form. The Federation would be interested in acquiring the rights to your quantum resonance techniques. We could automate the process, make it accessible to all. Absolutely not, Thomas and Naira said in unison. This isn't about profit or accessibility, Thomas continued. It's about the dialogue between artist and medium, between tradition and innovation. You can't automate that. Everything can be automated, Vela countered smoothly. That's progress. No, Naira's harmonics filled the room with resonant energy that made every piece in the studio vibrate subtly. That's efficiency. Progress is finding new ways for genuine connection to flourish. Raphael, who had been quietly observing, suddenly laughed. You know, Thomas, I came here to save traditional craftsmanship. But perhaps you're preserving it in the only way that matters, by helping it grow. Vela's expression hardened. The Federation won't be pleased. We have considerable influence in the art world. Then use it to help us, Thomas suggested, standing from his wheel. The half-formed piece continued to pulse with quantum harmonies. Instead of trying to control this discovery, help us share it properly. Not as a technology to be replicated, but as a practice to be learned. Through proper training and respect for both traditions, Naira added, her skin shimmering with possibility. A true bridge between worlds. Raphael stepped forward. The Classical Arts Council would be interested in such an approach. Assuming, of course, that traditional techniques remain at the core of the training. Thomas and Naira exchanged glances. They already are, Thomas said. Everything we've discovered builds on classical foundations. We're not replacing the old ways, we're revealing their hidden dimensions. As if to emphasize his point, the clay on his wheel suddenly blazed with new patterns, responding to the heightened emotions and quantum energies in the room. Even Vela's augmented eyes widened at the display. Perhaps, she conceded slowly, the Federation could reconsider its position. A more collaborative approach might be advantageous. As their visitors departed, Thomas and Naira surveyed their studio, their sanctuary of innovation and tradition. The day's confrontations had unexpectedly opened new doors, suggesting possibilities neither had considered. They'll be back, Naira observed, her harmonics settling into a contemplative frequency. With more demands, more resistance. Thomas nodded, already reaching for fresh clay. Then we'll keep showing them what's possible when you trust the material, trust tradition, and trust each other. After all, he smiled as quantum harmonies began to pulse beneath his fingers, we're just getting started. The Grand Gallery of New Venice sparkled like a jewel in the morning light, its crystal dome refracting sunlight into prismatic patterns across the exhibition space. Thomas stood in the center of the main hall, surrounded by their work, dozens of pieces that bridged the gap between human craft and quantum artistry. Each vessel, sculpture, and installation pulsed with living harmonies that drew gasps of wonder from the gathering crowd. Naira moved through the space with fluid grace, her skin resonating with the quantum frequencies of their creations. She paused beside a particularly striking piece, a towering sculpture that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its surface shifting between states like light through water. They're responding to each other, she murmured as Thomas joined her. The quantum harmonies are creating interference patterns I've never seen before. Indeed, the assembled works had begun to generate unexpected resonances, their combined energies producing effects that neither Thomas nor Naira had anticipated. Visitors to the exhibition found themselves experiencing sensations beyond normal human perception, fleeting glimpses of quantum states, momentary awareness of universal harmonies. Master Ward. A young artist pushed through the crowd, her eyes bright with excitement. I can feel it, the frequencies you mentioned in your workshop last week. It's like the clay is singing. Thomas smiled, remembering the small group of students they'd begun mentoring. Despite opposition from various quarters, a growing number of artists had sought them out, eager to learn this new approach that honored both tradition and innovation. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Vela Thorne, now flanked by Federation security officers. "Impressive display," she said, her augmented eyes scanning the artwork. "But potentially dangerous. Our sensors detect quantum fluctuations beyond approved safety parameters." "Your sensors aren't calibrated for artistic expression," Naira countered, her harmonics causing ripples in the air. "These are natural frequencies, not technological hazards. Natural or not, they're affecting people in ways we don't understand." Vela produced an official-looking document. "The Federation requires all quantum-resonant art to undergo safety certification before public display." Thomas stepped forward, his voice firm. "Art isn't meant to be safe. It's meant to transform, to challenge our perceptions. That's what we're doing here." "Indeed you are," came a new voice. The crowd parted to reveal Ambassador Lyria Sol of the Interstellar Arts Council, her silver robes catching the light. "And that's precisely why we're here." The ambassador approached one of the pieces, studying its shifting patterns. "Do you know why the council has taken such interest in your work? It's not just the technical innovation, it's the proof that different species can achieve genuine creative synthesis. Which makes it all the more important to regulate," Vela began, but the ambassador raised a hand for silence. "The Federation's concerns about safety are noted," she said diplomatically. "But perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Instead of trying to control this new art form, we should be learning from it." As if in response to her words, the quantum harmonies in the room shifted, creating a symphony of resonance that everyone present could feel. The security officers' instruments began giving impossible readings, while visitors stood transfixed by patterns that seemed to speak directly to their souls. "This is what art is supposed to do," Thomas said quietly. "Break down barriers we didn't even know we had." A group of traditional craftspeople who had been skeptical of Thomas's new direction now moved closer to the works, their expressions softening as they felt the familiar techniques at the core of each piece. "The classical methods are still there," one of them observed. "But they're awakened somehow. Like seeing a familiar face in an entirely new light." Naira's skin rippled with approval. "That's exactly what we've been trying to achieve. Not a replacement of tradition, but an evolution of it." Ambassador Sol turned to address the crowd. "The Council proposes establishing a new institution, one dedicated to exploring this convergence of human and Lemnian artistic traditions. Not to control or commercialize it, but to nurture its natural development." "Under whose authority?" Vela demanded. "Under the authority of art itself," the ambassador replied with a slight smile. "With Master Ward and Naira Vel as its founding teachers." Thomas and Naira exchanged glances, sharing a moment of silent communication developed through months of collaboration. This was an opportunity to share their discovery properly, to help others find the harmonies they discovered. "We accept," Thomas said, "on one condition: the institution must remain independent, free from both Federation control and traditional constraints." "The Federation cannot allow," Vela began, but her words were drowned out by a sudden surge of quantum resonance. Every piece in the exhibition blazed with harmonic energy, creating a display that left even the most hardened skeptic speechless. When the resonance settled, Ambassador Sol spoke again. "I believe the art has made its position clear. The Council approves your condition." As the crowd erupted in excited discussion, Thomas felt Naira's hand slip into his. Her skin pulsed with patterns that matched his own creative energy, a harmony they discovered together. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. "Think of all the barriers yet to be broken, all the harmonies waiting to be found." Thomas squeezed her hand, feeling the quantum frequencies dance between them. "Together," he replied, watching as their art continued to transform the space around them, "will help others find their own resonance." 1 year after the groundbreaking exhibition, the Institute of Harmonic Arts rose from the heart of New Venice like a dream made manifest. Its spiral architecture combined earthen materials with quantum-resonant crystals, creating a structure that seemed to sing with creative energy. Thomas stood in the central courtyard, watching as students from a dozen different species work together at specially designed wheels and workstations. The newest piece just emerged from the quantum kiln, Naira announced, gliding up beside him. Her skin shimmered with pride as she showed him images of a student's work, a vessel that perfectly balanced traditional technique with interspatial harmonics. Remarkable, Thomas breathed, studying the piece. She's managed to maintain quantum coherence throughout the firing process. Something we struggled with for months. Our students are surpassing us, Naira observed, her harmonics carrying pleased undertones. Exactly as we hoped. They walked together through the Institute's grounds, passing workshops where human craftspeople worked alongside Luminian artists, each learning from the other's traditions. The air hummed with creative energy, quantum harmonies mixing with the earthier vibrations of classical techniques. A commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. Director Vela Thorne had returned, but this time without security escorts. More surprisingly, her chrome augmentations had been replaced with quantum-sensitive enhancements that shimmed with familiar frequencies. The Federation has been studying your results, she announced without preamble. The applications extend far beyond art. The way you've managed to bridge quantum effects and macro-scale materials, it's revolutionary. That's what we've been saying all along, Thomas replied carefully. Though I sense there's more to this visit than scientific validation. Vela's new quantum interfaces pulsed with what might have been embarrassment. The Federation would like to propose a collaboration. Not to commercialize your techniques, but to explore how they might help us better understand the universe itself. Before Thomas could respond, a familiar figure emerged from the Institute's shadow, Ambassador Sol, accompanied by Raphael Chen and several members of the Classical Arts Council. Perfect timing, the ambassador said. We were just discussing the next phase of the Institute's development. Naira's skin rippled with interest. What next phase? Raphael stepped forward, his traditional robes now subtly embedded with quantum-resonant threads. We've been watching, learning. What you've created here goes beyond art. It's a new way of understanding reality itself, one that honors both scientific precision and intuitive wisdom. The Council proposes expanding the Institute's scope, Ambassador Sol explained. Not just a school for artists, but a center for exploring the fundamental harmonies that connect all things. The Federation's scientific resources could prove invaluable in this endeavor. Thomas and Naira shared a look of silent communication, their energies synchronizing in the way that had become second nature. And traditional techniques? Thomas asked. Would remain at the core of everything, Raphael assured them. We've learned that lesson well. The old ways don't limit us, they ground us, giving us a foundation from which to reach further. As if to emphasize his point, a student's experimental piece nearby suddenly achieved perfect quantum resonance, its surface blazing with patterns that reflected both earthly and cosmic frequencies. The gathered leaders fell silent, watching in wonder. You see? Naira said softly. The universe speaks through every medium, if we only learn to listen properly. Thomas moved to the nearest workstation, gathering a piece of clay. Without speaking, he began to work, his hands moving with practiced skill while his newly awakened senses engaged with quantum harmonies. The clay responded, taking on forms that seemed to bridge dimensions. This is what we're really teaching, he explained as the others gathered around. Not just techniques or theories, but the art of finding harmony between different ways of seeing, of being. Every piece we create is a conversation between worlds. Vela stepped closer, her quantum interfaces registering complex data patterns. The Federation's scientists have been trying to achieve stable quantum effects at macro scales for decades. You've done it with clay and intuition. Because we weren't trying to control it, Naira explained, her skin pulsing in rhythm with Thomas's creation. We were trying to understand it, to work with it. To find the places where different realities naturally want to connect. Ambassador Sol smiled. And in doing so, you've shown us all a new path forward. The question is, are you ready to help us explore where it leads? Thomas looked around at what they'd built, not just the institute itself, but the community it had fostered. Students and teachers from across the galaxy, each bringing their own traditions and perspectives, all learning to find the harmonies that connected them. We are, he said, feeling Naira's agreement resonating through their shared frequencies. But we do it together, artists and scientists, traditionalists and innovators, Earth and stars. Every voice adding to the greater harmony. As if in response, every piece of quantum-resonant art in the Institute began to pulse with synchronized energy. The pattern spread, connecting person to person, piece to piece, until the entire building sang with unified purpose. In that moment, everyone present understood, this wasn't just about art anymore. It was about discovering new ways for all beings to connect, to create, to grow. The clay under Thomas's hands took its final form, a simple vessel that somehow contained complexities beyond normal spacetime. But now he understood that every piece they created was just the beginning of a larger conversation, one that would continue to evolve long after they were gone. The universe is full of harmonies waiting to be found, Naira said, her voice carrying the weight of promise. We've only begun to hear the first notes. Thomas nodded, already imagining the possibilities that lay ahead. Together, they had bridged the gap between Earth and stars, between tradition and innovation, between different ways of seeing reality itself. And in doing so, they had created something greater than art, they had created hope.